Throughout history, there have been leaders who have wielded power with an iron fist, causing untold suffering and misery for their citizens. From brutal purges to genocide, their actions have left a dark stain on humanity. In this video, we will explore 10 of the most ruthless dictators in history, delving into their reigns and the atrocities they committed. But as we examine these leaders, we must also ask ourselves, how did they come to power? What factors enabled them to commit such horrific acts? And how can we prevent such atrocities from happening again? Adolf Hitler. Our first dictator is one of the most infamous in history. Adolf Hitler, leader of Nazi Germany, came to power in 1933, and led his country into World War II. He oversaw the systematic extermination of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, as well as the deaths of millions of others in concentration camps, wars, and forced labor. But what led to Hitler's rise to power? Many factors, including Germany's defeat in World War I, economic hardship, and a widespread belief in nationalist and anti-Semitic ideology, paved the way for his ascent. Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin, leader of the Soviet Union, was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 20 million people. He oversaw brutal purges and show trials, and sent millions to labor camps, where they endured unimaginable suffering and death. Stalin's reign was marked by paranoia, fear, and a cult of personality. But how did such a brutal dictator come to power? In the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, Stalin rose through the ranks of the Communist Party, leveraging his power and influence to eliminate his rivals and consolidate his rule. Pol Pot. Pol Pot was the leader of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, where he oversaw the deaths of nearly 2 million people. He implemented a radical communist regime that sought to eliminate all vestiges of the past and create a new, agrarian society. Pol Pot's rise to power was fueled by a desire to create a new society free from corruption and inequality. But his policies led to widespread famine, disease, and death. In the end, his regime was toppled by a Vietnamese invasion, but the scars of his reign still linger in Cambodia to this day. Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, former leader of Iraq, ruled with an iron fist for over 2 decades. He was responsible for the deaths of thousands of Iraqis, as well as the invasion of Kuwait in 1990, which led to the Gulf War. Saddam's regime was marked by brutal repression, torture, and executions. But his rise to power was fueled in part by a desire to modernize Iraq and promote Arab unity. However, his ambitions led to wars and conflicts that destabilized the region and caused untold suffering. Idi Amin. Idi Amin, former president of Uganda, was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 300,000 people during his reign. He oversaw brutal purges and massacres, and famously declared himself the King of Scotland. Amin's rise to power was marked by violence and brutality, but his early years as president saw some social and economic progress. However, his policies eventually led to a collapse of the economy and widespread human rights abuses. Kim Jong Il. Kim Jong Il, former leader of North Korea, ruled with an iron fist for over a decade. He was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 1.5 million North Koreans, many of whom perished in concentration camps and forced labor. Kim Jong-il's regime was marked by extreme repression, censorship, and a cult of personality. But his rise to power was enabled by a complex web of family and political connections, as he succeeded his father, Kim Il-sung, as leader of North Korea. Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi, former leader of Libya, ruled with an iron fist for over 4 decades. He was responsible for the deaths of thousands of Libyans, as well as supporting terrorist groups and carrying out brutal crackdowns on political dissidents. Gaddafi's rise to power was fueled in part by his charisma and nationalist rhetoric, as he sought to create a united Arab state. However, his policies led to widespread poverty and oppression, and he was eventually overthrown in a popular uprising in 2011. Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong, former leader of China, was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 45 million people during his reign. He oversaw the Great Leap Forward, a campaign to rapidly modernize China's economy that led to widespread famine and death. Mao's regime was marked by repression, censorship, and a cult of personality. But his rise to power was enabled by a combination of nationalist and communist ideology, as well as his skillful manipulation of Chinese politics. Francisco Franco. Francisco Franco, former leader of Spain, ruled with an iron fist for nearly 4 decades. He was responsible for the deaths of thousands of Spaniards, as well as the oppression of political dissidents and minority groups. Franco's rise to power was enabled by the Spanish Civil War, which he won with the support of fascist forces. He subsequently established a totalitarian regime that was marked by repression and censorship, and which stifled political dissent. Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe, former leader of Zimbabwe, ruled with an iron fist for nearly 4 decades. He was responsible for the deaths of thousands of Zimbabweans, as well as the economic collapse of the country. Mugabe's rise to power was fueled in part by his role in the liberation struggle against white minority rule. However, his policies led to widespread poverty and oppression, and his regime was marked by corruption, repression, and censorship. As we have seen, the 10 dictators we have explored in this video were responsible for untold suffering and misery. But they did not come to power in a vacuum. Rather, their rise to power was enabled by a complex web of factors, including ideology, charisma, nationalism, and political skill. As we reflect on their legacies, we must also ask ourselves, how can we prevent such atrocities from happening again? How can we promote democracy, human rights, and social justice, and ensure that our leaders are accountable to their citizens? These are difficult questions with no easy answers. But as we confront the challenges of the present and the future, we must remain vigilant, and work together to create a world that is free from tyranny and oppression.